Hello everybody, this is Soundwarp SG1, back with another video. Sorry it's taken so long, but naturally as soon as I started my YouTube channel, I got the flu, so I spent basically all of February to coughy and sneezy and whatnot to really be able to make any kind of YouTube videos of any kind. But anyway, back now, basically next couple videos I'm going to be trying to go over a couple different tools you can use for modding and things like that, because a few people have asked about that kind of thing. And the first couple ones are just going to be pretty basic stuff, and then maybe after about maybe 3 videos of that, and then a couple videos of more kind of not necessarily advanced stuff, but just more things you might not think about and that kind of thing that you can use for mods. But today I'm just going to be talking about basically a kind of wire cutter / clipper. They have a couple different names. This one in particular that I have here it's a Xuron brand, which is Xuron, Xuron. And basically they're just, there's like what they look like, a little clipper with a little spring, so they have some like kind of spring back action, and they have a little flush side here. They're usually called flush cutters or something like that. That's kind of what you want to look for, is for them to say flush somewhere there, because you want this kind of smooth edge on one side where there's no like angles to it or anything. And the main thing that these are used for, which isn't even really modding necessarily, but just getting things off of bases to rebase them, like especially HeroClix figures. They're really good for that, because I've heard a couple people say like, oh yeah, I try to use an X-Acto knife to get somebody off their base, and like that can be a good way to cut yourself. And these things are they're a lot easier to use for that kind of thing, in my opinion, and just also a lot safer. And the main thing with clippers is that they can kind of deform things in a way an X-Acto knife can't, because they're two sides kind of pressing down. But with HeroClix, they all have, you can kind of see the newer ones have this sort of thicker base here, and the older ones tend to still have like a little kind of circle of plastic wherever they're connected. So if you're just getting that off, you don't really care if it's damaged a little bit, and usually you can get it off with almost no damage anyway. But I'll try to see if I can get this on screen. But you can basically kind of just make sure you're under there, right? And then you can just squeeze it, and it basically just pops the glue. And so you can see that's pretty clean kind of separation there. And now the one important thing when you're doing this, by the way, is if something is like you're severing the last connection point between two things, this thing can shoot off stuff and make things go flying. So make sure you are aiming where something will rebound against something, or you can catch it, or have some kind of defense against that. But like I said, for these kind of circular things from the older model clicks, those are almost always fairly easy to get off. And if you want to actually or you don't even want that, and you just want to get his foot, for the most part, depending on the design of the figure, you can usually get these off with fairly minimal damage. Like you might squeeze his foot a teeny bit, but that's not really noticeable. And then you can always touch this up with an X-Acto knife to kind of trim it a little bit, but that's a lot easier and safer than trying to go directly to the X-Acto knife. With these newer ones, if you want to try to get this big base off, it honestly just depends. Like some of them seem to be a lot more firmly attached than others, but this will do it. This clipper can definitely get it done. It's just sort of a matter of how difficult it is. But usually you just kind of try to squeeze around, and like this one I can feel is going to be a little bit trickier. But you can kind of just sort of go around the edges and just take your time with it. And eventually you get where you can just pop it off with your hands. And that's fairly clean. Like I said, it's got a little break here on this one, which does happen from time to time, but it's still enough where you can probably clean that up with an X-Acto knife and make it look decent. It's just a matter of you know, how much, you know, for some people, like if you just want this dude on a base and you're not really particular about the details, this is fine and a lot quicker and safer than an X-Acto knife. And like I said, same kind of thing with these, because the actual figures are not really much different between these newer ones and the older ones. I think the plastic is probably like slightly different, but they're close enough where like I can kind of go under here and still just sort of snip off his foot. And if you're reasonably kind of careful with it, you should be able to do it without really any... See, that looks pretty, you know, there's not really any real damage there that's really noticeable, especially because unless you're into that, you probably aren't looking at his feet a whole lot anyway. And like I said, that's, you know, fairly nice looking and just a lot quicker and safer than an X-Acto knife usually is, unless you're, you know, very skilled with an X-Acto knife, or not even necessarily very skilled, but more skilled than some people might be. And because, you know, with these things, you have to actually kind of be, I'm not even going to try to do it on camera because I'll probably cut myself, but, you know, you have to be down here and kind of really put some pressure on. The nice thing with this is, you know, you're using a leverage point where you can use a lot more pressure without, and you have a lot more control, and the blade is not, you know, it's very hard to accidentally nick yourself with this thing. When you're cutting things, the tip is actually sharp enough that if somehow you know, go like that, you can hurt yourself with these. But generally, for this kind of work, I feel a lot safer than just going with an X-Acto knife. And like I said, if I had like 50 of these things, I could basically shuck them like oysters and get through them fairly quick. Whereas with an X-Acto knife, at least I can't do that fast. Some people might, but not me. Anyway, like I said, for this kind of work, these are really good. For more like actual modding stuff where you're trying to get pieces parts, these are still pretty good for especially things where you think it's just at an angle where you're worried you're going to cut yourself. It's a lot better to have a slightly messed up figure that you can fix than have to deal with fixing an actual injury to yourself. But usually, like, this figure is honestly hideous and also like managed to somehow break. So I'm just going to test on this thing, but basically, if it's a fairly easy joint, like I'll just clip off her leg here, and basically the more important part is the one you want kind of underneath here, underneath the smooth one. If both sides are equally important, you're just going to have to kind of judge it, but as long as you can kind of get a good kind of angle on it, you can clip these, kind of just clip things with this, and if I can get it. And see, that isn't really a noticeable, not really at all, much any deformation or anything like that, which is the one thing you have to worry about, because if you squeeze these wrong, they will just actually kind of warp the plastic in a way an X-Acto knife wouldn't. But that looks pretty good. Or like, you know, for this figure, which is honestly terrible, and the only thing that I'd probably even want to salvage from this thing is his hand, like I can probably get that off. And, you know, got it off. That's a fairly clean break. And you can always kind of just touch this up with an X-Acto knife. I'm going to be covering X-Acto knives in a future video, actually, so if you somehow don't know what an X-Acto knife is, don't get into a panic. But anyway, it makes a fairly clean cut, and, you know, just especially if you just don't really feel like risking nicking yourself or whatever, it's a pretty nice nice thing for that. And you can always go back and touch it up, and like I said, this doesn't really even need much touching up. And then, you know, after you've got this piece, you can go connect it to whatever you want, which I'll cover in a later video. But yeah, so anyway, these are something that even if you're just doing rebasing, definitely recommend getting some clippers. Snippers, you know, they have a bunch of different names, but, you know, just any kind of clippy device like this will work. These things are really designed for, you know, wires and metal and stuff, so for the most part, pretty much any of them will work fine for this kind of stuff. Like just regular, you know, fairly cheap plastic stuff is not a problem for these, because like these can actually, you know, if I wanted to, I could start destroying this whole thing, you know, if I felt like it. Just kind of, and this is significantly harder plastic on these pieces. So yeah, they're fairly good tool to have, and of course they have plenty of other uses, and they're usually only like $10 at the maximum, something like that. So for $10, they can keep you safe while modding, and they have plenty of uses just around the house, etc., etc. So definitely a tool I'd recommend. Probably the main tool in your arsenal, basically one of the top 3, definitely. But that's all I'm going to be covering for this video. Like I said, next video will be coming out in a couple days probably, or something like that, and I'll be covering X-Acto knives, which are the other kind of main tool that you should kind of have for doing any kind of modding stuff. But for now, I will see y'all on the flip side.